So you've heard of the martial-caster divide, the idea that casters are generally much more powerful than martials, especially at later game. But what is the caster-caster divide? If you've ever built a spellcaster and tried to optimize it in any degree, you know what the caster-caster divide is. It's the idea that one caster, given a certain selection of spells, can be much more powerful than another caster given another selection of spells, even if both are geared towards damage dealing or even blasting. Some spells will just blast another spell way out of the water. If you've been around in any sort of optimization forums or read any articles or listened to any YouTube videos about optimization, you've probably picked up a couple of these already. For example, Fireball does good damage, Blight does bad damage, Wall of Force is amazing control, Wall of Water is not good control. Now, almost any spell in the game has some use, and you can find a niche for it given a certain circumstance or a given campaign or character. But generally speaking, there are some spells that are just more powerful than another spell at the given level. I've already done some numerical analysis on the martial and caster divide. I thought it'd be interesting to run some analysis on the caster-caster divide. So what I've done is I've taken two wizards. Wizards because, well, they've got the biggest spell list, so we can see the biggest variance in the caster-caster divide. One wizard build will take good spells, the other will take bad spells. How do I determine what's good and bad? I did a quick Google search to find wizard spell list guide, and Treant Monk's guide showed up. So I mostly followed that, except I added some tweaks because the meta has changed and also spells have been updated. Both of these builds will be geared towards dealing as much damage as possible using the spells that we've chosen. By just focusing on damage, we'll easily be able to calculate their damage per round and then compare those numbers. Disclaimer though, Treant Monk typically builds God Wizards, and these are controller wizards, so the way he rates spells might be a little different, and I've adjusted the spell list to reflect that. Of course, piloting a build, meaning the player who runs the build, is very important as well. So that's something obviously we can't take into account right here, but I'll attempt to run these builds the same way. We're going to have a concentration spell that we focus on, and then we'll do our other spells with blasts. At level 1, we're going to choose our good and our bad cantrip, as well as our good and our bad level 1 spell. For the good spells, we're going to choose Toll the Dead for our cantrip. This is a D8 necrotic damage or a D12 necrotic damage if the target has already been damaged. Most of the time, either we've hit them or our teammates have already hit them before, so I'm going to assume we do a D12 damage each time. Now this is a whiz save instead of an attack, and it does around the same damage as Firebolt actually, so we could pick that too. For our good level 1 spell, we're going to have Magic Missile as our blast spell. It's very basic, and it just does, on average, 7.5 damage. 3 darts that automatically hit. It's nice, but it's nothing amazing. Honestly, at first level, the blast spells are pretty close. For our bad spells, we're going to pick the Thunderclap cantrip. Thunderclap is a con save, or they take 1d6 thunder damage every creature within 5 feet of us. So first off, con saves are one of the highest saving throws in the game, typically for monsters, so that's bad. 1d6 damage is also not good. Finally, we have to be in melee range with them to use this. So yeah, theoretically we could hit multiple enemies with this, but we have to get so close that it ends up putting us in peril. So yeah, it's a pretty bad pick. Even if we take into account that we can hit multiple enemies with this, it's still dealing about half the damage as a Toll the Dead does. And for the record, the way that I'm going to calculate how many enemies we hit is by using this table here. Essentially, if it's a certain number of squares, I'll assume 1.3 enemies. If it's a bigger size, then I'll assume 2. If it's even bigger than that, I'll assume 3. And if it has a chance to do friendly fire, I will reduce the number of targets by 15%, meaning it's harder to place that. And then for level 1, we're going to take a look at Witch Bolt. Why is Witch Bolt a bad spell? Well, first of all, it does 1d12 damage, which isn't much more than a cantrip. The part that draws people to Witch Bolt is that you can reactivate it as an action without rolling to attack again, so it feels safer in a way. The problem is it has limited range, and once the enemy moves out of that range, the spell is over. And once the enemy dies, that spell's over too. So if you target an enemy, you're likely only going to get maybe one additional hit if you land the first one. And then those hits aren't even much more than a firebolt. So yeah, it's not a great spell. Now, let's assume we have a 4-round deadly encounter, meaning we take out a deadly encounter over the course of 4 rounds. We would do on average 4.7 damage per round using our good spells. And that's taking out about 26% of the deadly encounter. That's pretty good, and we're pulling our weight. For the bad spells, we deal 3.3 damage per round, and that takes us to 18.5% of the combat. Significantly less. Even at level 1, by picking the right spells, we can deal 1.5 times the damage. And it's gonna get much worse from here. Let's jump to 2nd level spells. For our good spell pick, we're gonna say Flaming Sphere. Anything that ends its turn next to it takes some damage. We can also use a bonus action on our turn to ram it into somebody, and they have to make a dex save or take fire damage again. So it's unlikely that enemies will end their turn next to it, but we definitely can get that bonus action each turn. And that is great because then we can use our full actions to blast, and then bonus action to activate it. So at level 3, we'll do Flaming Sphere on the first round and ram it into somebody, and then we'll do Magic Missile, and then we'll do Toll the Dead from there on. This leads us to 9 damage per round, which is 31% of a deadly encounter. That's pretty good damage, almost a third of a deadly encounter just by yourself. Now, Flame Sphere uses our concentration, but eventually we'll hit a point where we're going to want to use that concentration on another spell. So we'll want to pick a non-concentration blast spell for level 2 as well. And here we'll go with Shatter. It's a decent AoE blast. I think the first real one you get. So we'll take that here. Now, moving on to the bad spells. For our concentration pick, we're going to say Dust Devil. This is a bad one. It isn't quite a damage spell, but it does deal damage. So I could see it being a trap that some players will read the spell and think, I can use this to deal damage, when in fact, it's just not going to work. It's similar to Flaming Sphere in that if an enemy ends their turn next to it, they take some damage. But you don't have a bonus action to ram it into people. So you can't automatically activate it each turn. Instead, you're just going to have to hope that the enemy stays next to it. And the damage that it does deal is much less. In these numbers, I'm going to say only 2 enemies ever end up next to the Dust Devil at the end of their turns. Maybe that's a little low, but honestly, it's easy to escape from it. Then for our non-concentration blast spell at level 2, our bad spell pick is going to be Melf's Acid Arrow. This is an attack roll against a target, and you deal 4d4 damage, and then at the end of their next turn, they take another 2d4 damage. So all in all, 64 damage, 6d4, not 64. The nice thing is that if it misses, it deals half of that first damage, so 2d4. The problem is, one, it's broken up over 2 turns, and I don't really get why. But then also, it just is not a lot of damage. Compare this to something like Scorching Ray, where you can target one person with all 3 rays. That's going to be 6d6. Much more. And it's all in the same turn, so you could potentially just kill them right there. Now for our bad wizard, the damage per round by doing Dust Devil, a Chromatic Orb, and then our Thunderclap is going to be 5 damage per round. And that turns out to 17% of a deadly encounter. It's getting close to half the damage of our good wizard, and this is only 2nd level spells. Let's jump ahead to level 5 and get our 3rd level spell slots. For our good wizard, we're going to be taking Summon Fae for our concentration option, and Fireball for our non-concentration option. Summon Fae is a Tasha's summon. The way it works is you use an action to summon this Fae creature. It does pretty good damage. It does 2d6 plus 3 plus the spell's level. So right now, 2d6 plus 6. We won't be upcasting this, but if you were to cast it as a level 4 spell later, they will attack twice, which is great. The option that we're going to have here for our Summon Fae is going to give us advantage on our attacks each round. So that's 2d6 plus 6 with advantage. That's quite good. And then Fireball, great choice. Iconic. It does 8d6 fire damage, and it's kind of the standard that all other blast spells are compared to. Using these new spells, our Good Wizard does 20.4 damage per round. That's 39% of a deadly encounter. That's a lot. Quite good. For our Bad Wizard, the spells we'll pick will be Vampiric Touch for our concentration option, and then Erupting Earth for our non-concentration option. Vampiric Touch lets you do a vampiric attack each turn. This is using your melee spell attack, so thankfully you don't need to be rolling dex or whatnot. The cool thing about it is that you heal half of the damage that you've dealt. So yeah, it can turn into some sort of regenerative ability, and I think it feels cool. So I wouldn't be surprised if some wizards took this thinking maybe it's a good spell. The problem with it is that number one, we have to go into melee, which I guess if we're thunderclapping, we are already doing. But it's not quite enough damage or regeneration to keep us alive in melee for that long. If we were to compare it directly to Summon Fae, one, we don't need to get close into the combat. Our Fae creature can do that for us. And the Fae creature does more damage than this does every round. And then we have the rest of our action to cast spells. So comparing these two, yeah, Vampiric Touch is not up to snuff, assuming that Summon Fae is the snuff. And then Erupting Earth for the non-concentration option, it's 3d12 damage, so it's not close to Fireball, but if you're using it, you're probably using it in order to create some difficult terrain. So yeah, it does less damage, but it's got more control than Fireball, that's for sure. In combat, our Bad Wizard, if they use Vampiric Touch all 4 rounds, they'll deal 9.5 damage per round. That's 18.2% of a deadly encounter. Not a lot. Now we've crossed the point where the Good Wizard is doing more than double the amount of damage as the Bad Wizard. But I should note, the Bad Wizard is using less spell slots since Vampiric Touch only uses 1. Moving on to level 7. Our Good Wizard is going to select the spell Summon Greater Demon. This spell lets you summon a powerful demon to aid you. The one I'm going to use here is Barlgura, and it lets you attack 3 times, and it has reckless attack, so it'll have advantage on all those attacks, and it deals a good amount of damage, a lot of damage in fact. The downside is that if you lose concentration, or the demon makes a charisma save against your DC, it will break free of your control, and you no longer can tell it what to do. So hopefully you can place this on the opposite side of the enemies, and if it does lose control, it will plow through them first. But it will disappear within 1d6 rounds after it loses control, so hopefully not too bad. Also, with it using reckless attack each turn, it'll probably go down before the end of the encounter. So here, I'm going to assume that it lasts for 3 rounds. The non-concentration option for level 4, I'm going to choose Psychic Lance. This is a great spell, and not just for the damage. It deals 7d6 damage on a failed int save. Int is probably the best save to target in the entire game, so that's very reliable. But the extra great part is that you incapacitate them if they fail to save as well. So we're getting into an area where spells often deal damage as well as have debuff effects at the same time. And there are less and less spells that are just blasting. So for our Good Wizard, if we summon a demon, and then we have a Fireball, a Shatter, and then a Magic Missile, we will deal 42.4 damage per round. That is 68% of a deadly encounter. So you are taking out 2/3 of an encounter all by yourself. Yes, this Good Wizard is good. Now onto the Bad Wizard. Here, we're going to take Elemental Bane as our concentration option. This is a cool spell in idea, but in practice, it just fails. You target an enemy, they make a Constitution saving throw, and if they fail it, they are somewhat vulnerable to your elemental attacks that you've chosen. So you choose an element, and then whenever they are hit with that element, once each turn, they will take an extra 2d6 damage. This also will cut through resistance to that element, which is potentially useful. There's a lot of problems with this spell. Number one, it's a con save. So you can use a 4th level spell, they save, and literally nothing happens. The second is that it just doesn't do much damage. Let's say you spend the rest of the 3 turns of the encounter hitting them with this damage. That's only going to be an extra 6d6 damage over the course of the encounter. And it's only an extra 66 damage if you land every single attack after that. A quick jump to our non-concentration spell here. It is Blight. This is just a bad blast spell. It doesn't do enough damage, it's single target. The only cool thing about it is it's really effective against plants, but plants are very rare enemies, so not that helpful. Oh, and it's also a con save, so even less likely to land. Compare this to Psychic Lance. That's an int save and deals almost as much damage as Blight does, plus it incapacitates the enemy, so better on lots of accounts. In our example here, we use Elemental Bane to make them weak to acid damage. Then we can use Melf's Acid Arrow as a 2nd and a 3rd level spell. This is the only time we'll be upcasting a spell in this entire video, but I figured we had to do it in order to maximize our Elemental Bane. And then for our 1st level spell, we can use Chromatic Orb and actually deal acid damage with that as well. So we'll use 3 acid spells. And the cool thing about Melf's Acid Arrow is it does combo with Elemental Bane pretty well, because we can hit them once on our turn with acid damage, and then on their turn, they take acid damage again. So Elemental Bane actually triggers twice in that round, which is better than nothing. In total, our Bad Wizard is going to deal 12.4 damage per round, and that is 20% of a deadly encounter. Not terrible, but our Good Wizard is dealing about 3.5 times this damage. That's a pretty big divide. Jumping to level 9, let's take a look at the 5th level spells we're going to use. For the Good Wizard, we're going to choose Animate Objects for our concentration spell, and for our non-concentration spell, we'll choose Synaptic Static. Animate Objects is kind of an infamous spell for being overpowered. You can summon 10 objects, or if you summon bigger ones, you can summon less. The problem with this spell is that if you summon small ones, they actually deal way more damage in total than big objects will. And the amount of damage they deal combined is crazy. Synaptic Static, this is kind of like a fireball that also debuffs people. It doesn't deal any more damage, but the fact that it does these debuffs to enemies is quite useful. And it's also an int save, so much easier to land. So using Animate Objects, Psychic Lance, Fireball, and Shatter, our Good Wizard deals 72 damage per round. That is 92% of a deadly encounter. Yes, that's pretty much an entire deadly encounter all by yourself. I'm telling you, Animate Objects is too good. Moving on to our Bad Wizard, at level 9, we pick up Immolation for our concentration option and Negative Energy Flood for our non-concentration option. Immolation is not a great spell because it just doesn't do enough damage. What you do is you target somebody, they make a dex saving throw, and if they fail, they take 7d6 fire damage. That's less than a fireball, and it's only one person. And if they fail the save, they stay on fire, and each round they repeat the save. If they fail, they continue taking a little bit more damage. It's not terrible, it's just not really better than a fireball. See what I mean about it being the standard? The non-concentration option, Negative Energy Flood, is a con save, or they take 5d12 necrotic damage. If it kills them, they immediately rise up as a zombie and attack whoever is closest to them. So it would be cool if it was like Finger of Death and you killed them and it was a zombie under your control, but it's not, and hopefully it'll be an enemy that they target. The only cool thing about this spell is that you can use it to heal your undead, which maybe is useful. So, using Immolation and our other blast spells, we'll deal 27.6 damage per round, and that is 35% of a deadly encounter. In my books, anything above 30% of a deadly encounter, I consider high damage. So, this is actually the first time the Bad Wizard falls into high damage. And if the Bad Wizard, who's picking the worst blast spells in the game, still does high damage, Man, I feel bad for marshals. But the good wizard's still about 2.5 times the damage as the bad wizard. At level 11, we get our 6th level spells, and for the good wizard, we're going to take Summon Fiend. This is a Tasha's summon, and we're also going to take for our non-concentration option, Chain Lightning. Chain Lightning is one of those rare blast spells, so it's nice to take that. It deals 10d8 lightning damage, and it can target 4 people. So if you do have all that HP spread out in an encounter, you can actually take out quite a good chunk. Summon Fiend, like all other Tasha summons, is a very good single target damage spell. If we use Summon Fiend as our concentration and then blast spells, we'll deal 53 damage per round, and that ends up being 56% of a deadly encounter. The damage per round has gone down since our animate objects has left, and we could upcast that, but I'm trying to avoid upcasting, so we get a damage dip here. However, it is still more than half of a deadly encounter. It's quite powerful still. For our bad wizard, the spells we're going to choose is Tensor's Transformation for our concentration spell, and Circle of Death for our non-concentration spell. Tensor's Transformation feels cool in a lot of ways. It basically turns your nerdy wizard into a hulking brute in the battlefield. Kind of like a Jekyll and Hyde sort of thing. Let me go over the things you get. 1, you get some temporary HP, so you can last in melee longer. You gain proficiency in simple martial weapons, armor, and shields, so that's great too, but I don't know how you're going to don armor in battle. Maybe you have a shield strapped to your back, but you can't exactly slip into some plate armor. And then your weapon attacks deal extra damage, and you have advantage on all weapon attacks. And then you get the extra attack feature, which is nice. So yeah, essentially you can pull out a sword, attack twice with it, deal extra damage, and have a little bit more survivability in melee. The downside is you cannot cast spells. So you cast this, you turn into the Hulk, and you can no longer think straight, so you're just smashing things. Spells are kind of what we do. So as a wizard, it's going to feel really bad not to do spells, but also Tensor's Transformation is not going to do as much damage as we might think. We're not going to use our intelligence to make attacks. We're still going to use our strength or dex. And I'm assuming we're going to be having a higher dex because that helps our AC out for most wizards. If we have a +3 to our dex, which I feel is kind of generous, we'll have at this level, +7 to our attack, but we have advantage. So we can hit pretty regularly. And the damage we deal is a d8 +3 plus 2d12. So each attack is actually meaningful. So if we use this, we can't use any other spells, but we actually will deal 36 damage per round. That's not bad. And it's actually 38% of a deadly encounter. It can feel like a trap maybe, but it's actually not that bad. Circle of Death on the other hand, now that one is a bad spell. It is literally fireball damage, but it's a constitution saving throw. And that's it. Am I missing something? But like I said, using Tensor's Transformation, we are able to catch up on the damage. The good wizard is about 1.5 times the bad wizard's damage right now. Jumping ahead to level 13 for 7th level spells. For the good wizard, we're going to take Draconic Transformation for our concentration spell, and we will take Crown of Stars for our non-concentration spell. Draconic Transformation is a pretty cool spell. It's a bonus action, and you can do a breath attack every round. It also gives you a fly speed and blind sight. So we can actually cast a spell on our turn, bonus action to transform into the dragon and breathe a breath weapon at the same time. And then every turn after that, bonus action, breath weapon. Crown of Stars is a lot like Melf's Minute Meteors. You have this circle of stars on your head and you can use a bonus action to launch them out every round. It's decent, quite nice if you can get it off before the battle starts because it lasts an hour. So in our good wizard calculations, we'll do Draconic Transformation, then Synaptic Static, then Psychic Lance, then a Fireball, and then a Shatter. Yeah, we're going to do 5 spells. And we're going to be hitting a lot of targets with this breath weapon each turn. That ends up being a lot of damage overall. Yes, it's spread out, but it's a lot. In total, we deal 97 damage per round, and that's 84% of a deadly encounter. This is great damage. For the Bad Wizard, we'll choose Mordenkainen's Sword for our concentration option, and Finger of Death for the non-concentration option. Mordenkainen's Sword is basically a spiritual weapon. It is a floating sword that you can use a bonus action to attack people with. The problem is it's just not better than spiritual weapon. The damage is just not very good. Finger of Death. This is a cool spell in that you can turn somebody into a zombie forever under your control. That can be really useful, especially if you're making a necromancer build. But the blast damage that it deals is a little bit lacking. First round, the Bad Wizard uses Mordenkainen's Sword as an action, and that attacks somebody, and then you can bonus action on that same turn to attack again. So in total, we'll get 4 attacks with Mordenkainen's Sword. Then we use Negative Energy Flood, and then we use Blight, and then Erupting Earth. In total, we'll deal 37.7 damage per round done this way. And that's about 33% of a deadly encounter. A third of a deadly encounter? Still good. Even using all of our worst spells, still dealing high damage. Continuing on, at level 15, we will get 8 level spells, and our Good Wizard is going to take Illusory Dragon. This is a pretty cool spell. Basically, you can summon this illusionary dragon, and everybody will be frightened of it. It's kind of like the Fear spell, so it combines good control with good damage. Of course, here we only care about the damage. And here, I'll skip over a non-concentration option because we'll never get to use it. So for our damage per round, for our Good Wizard, we deal 86 damage per round, and that turns out to be 68% of a deadly encounter. Still quite good, over 2/3 of a deadly encounter. Plus, we're getting a ton of good control through all the other benefits of these spells. For our Bad Wizard, actually 8th level concentration damage spells are all decent. Maybe Incendiary Cloud is probably the worst one, but if we're talking about just blast spells, then Horrid Wilting is gonna be our worst one. And by Horrid Wilting, I mean Abby Dalzim's Horrid Wilting. Let me know how you really pronounce that. Again, it's basically just a bad fireball. It does 10d8 damage, and it's a con save, and it's an area of effect. And it does nothing else. It's pretty bad when you've got other good uses for your 8th level spell slot. So if we do Horrid Wilting, Mordenkainen's Sword, Negative Energy Flood, and Blight, we deal about 49 damage per round, and that's 37.5% of a deadly encounter. Still quite good, despite the fact we have bad spells. Now for 9th level spells, the most powerful features of all of D&D 5e. For a Good Wizard, we're going to take Meteor Swarm. It's the ultimate blast spell. It's great, does a ton of damage, you could level a city with it. The problem is, you don't want to level your own teammates with it. If you want to do single target damage, Blade of Disaster is a good alternative. At level 17, we'll deal 133 damage per round. That is 87% of a deadly encounter. Very high, very powerful. On the other side, for our 9th level Bad Wizard spell, we're going to pick the infamous Weird. Yes, the Weird spell. Yeah, it really feels fair. You have one wizard that summons meteors from the sky, and you have another wizard that summons something weird. Weird is an AoE spell, and everybody in there will make a wisdom save or they become frightened. Then, on their turn, at the end of their turn, they have another wisdom saving throw, and if they fail that, they take 4d10 psychic damage. Whoa! So weird. Weird that the spell is a 9th level spell. So for our Bad Wizard, if we use Weird, Circle of Death, Negative Energy Flood, and Blight, we end up dealing 38.6 damage per round. And that ends up being 25% of a deadly encounter. We have slipped from high damage to average damage. And the Good Wizard is dealing about 3.5 times the damage of our Bad Wizard at this point. Take a look at this graph here, detailing our level by level step through our Good and our Bad Wizard's damage per round. We can see that it lags behind quite a bit. Now, maybe the spells we've picked for the Good Wizard are all outlier spells and too good and need to be toned down. Or maybe the bad ones are all too bad and need to be lifted up, but the wizard that chooses the bad spells are kind of more on par with martials, so maybe that's where the balance is supposed to be? I don't know, hard to say. I feel like probably both sides need to be squished down into a more level playing field for all the spells. So I think the caster-caster divide is an interesting concept to keep in mind, because at a lot of tables, the martial-caster divide might not be a problem due to the caster-caster divide. And a lot of people will think, oh, casters are much better than martials. But maybe not necessarily. It depends on how you play them and on what spells are picked. Have you seen instances where there's this caster-caster divide? And remember, this is just the damage portion of the caster-caster divide. I feel like the control portion would be even worse. But I haven't run those calculations. If that's something that'll be interesting to people, let me know. Leave me a comment below, like and subscribe to this video, and let me know that you'll want more of this kind of stuff. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.